Hi, I am Prabha Kaundinya, a doctoral student of school psychology. Today, I wish to present to you an infographic that I created to highlight the school experiences of South Asian American youth. I wish to thank DOSA, the Division of South Asian Americans, the Asian American Psychological Association, and my mentor, Moitri Chowdhury, for their encouragement and support in this venture. How does school feel to children and adolescents who identify as South Asian or South Asian American? What are the school experiences of these youth? What factors impact, define, and shape their lived experiences in American schools? These were the research questions I sought to explore in my infographic. While examining the school experiences, we had to first situate this population among other school-age youth in United States. Now, as of 2017 National Center for Education Statistics, Asian children make up 5% of the school-age population, that is, between 5 to 17 years of age in USA. Unfortunately, federal mandates do not report granular data on Asian subgroups, which means that we don't have an official count of the number of school-age children and adolescents that identify as South Asian or South Asian American. Now, South Asian Americans Leading Together, a nonprofit organization, has published statistics that there are about 5.4 million South Asians living in the United States today, which constitutes less than 2% of the current population of the United States. So extrapolating from that figure, we can say that South Asian American youth or students make up roughly 2% of the school-age population. Now, despite being a minuscule minority, South Asian Americans are the fastest growing minority in the United States and have made many contributions to academic, social, economic, and political life of this country. So let's go to what are the issues that affect the lived experiences of South Asian American students in schools. South Asian American youth's voices have traditionally been poorly represented in literature. This means that there is a paucity of research and understanding on the school experiences of South Asian American students. Having said that, there is some emergent work with this population over the latter half of this decade. And I present to you an amalgam of the literature that exists so far in order to give you a picture of the various issues that South Asian American youth face in school, home, and society. Now, first, we look at the model minority stereotype. What is the model minority stereotype? The model minority stereotype is an overgeneralized stereotype which treats all Asians as well as South Asian in United States as uniformly and universally successful. The term model minority was first coined in 1966 by the sociologist William Peterson in his New York Times article, wherein he described the success that Japanese Americans achieved despite the discriminations they endured in American society. Now, the model minority stereotype is a very significant aspect of the experience of many Asian Americans as well as South Asian Americans residing in USA and other global North countries. But it is a misguided myth because it masks the vast diversity within the South Asian American population. More importantly, it neglects the experiences of those who suffered academically, economically, or who otherwise experience mental health difficulties in this population. Moreover, it trivializes the racism and discrimination that many South Asian Americans experience in schools, workplaces, professions, and social life on a daily basis. It also limits their upward mobility. Now, we look at the internalization of the stereotype, which means that the model minority stereotype is not only widely shared among Americans, and that many Americans expect South Asian Americans to conform to the stereotype, but studies show that South Asian American youth themselves have internalized the stereotype and accept it to be true. It is said that the internalization of this model minority stereotype operates through dual pathways, one associated with pride and the other associated with pressure. So while South Asian American youth may feel a sense of pride in being held to such a high stereotype, it can also create pressure to conform, so that can lead them to lower resilience and higher likelihood of mental health problems. And then we'll explore the issue of parental involvement. Just like with other Asian American subgroups, South Asian Americans students report high levels of parental involvement. Now, while parental involvement can have a lot of protective factors, it can also heighten family conflict between parents and children, particularly regarding their education and careers. Therefore, while South Asian American youth may be performing academically well, their educational socialization process is fraught with emotional stress that often doesn't come up to the surface, or is often not spoken about or expressed with their school educators or with others outside the South Asian homes. And then we have to address the issue of racism and discrimination, as schooling is a highly racialized context in America. Studies with South Asian American school students have found that perceived discrimination that they receive from teachers as well as peers is often a reality for these students and can negatively influence these students' motivation, self-esteem, as well as achievement. Furthermore, the model minority myth that which is such a significant part of South Asian students' experience, can mask the racism and discrimination experienced by these students within the racialized context of American schools. Then moving on to systemic factors, we need to look at the cultural competency of educators as well as school systems as a whole. Part of the neglect, the implicit biases, and the discriminatory experiences that comes from a lack of cultural knowledge and awareness that educators and other school personnel possess in understanding the cultural background of South Asian American students and their families. Now, most educators in American schools are often white and female, and the lack of diversity and representation among educators hurts the cultural competence of schools and school personnel in catering to the unique needs of South Asian American students. And then we talk about shame and stigma, because stigma related to mental health needs and cultural practices enforces, there are these cultural practices that reinforce an internal fortitude, a kind of keeping it all, which unfortunately chastises help-seeking behavior. Moreover, the internalization of the model minority stereotype also makes it that much more difficult for South Asian American youth to go and seek help from their teachers or from other peers or other school personnel because of that. Then we talk about acculturative stress and ethnic identity. Now, the South Asian community has a large immigrant and recent immigrant history in United States history. So you have a lot of South Asian parents or grandparents who were first generation immigrants from South Asian countries. And many of the youth might be second generation immigrants, which then creates intergenerational acculturative gaps, which can then impede their relationship dynamics. And we know that adolescence is an important period for identity development. So many South Asian American youth may be caught between the conflicting pressures to assimilate with the mainstream versus the ability to form a unique cultural and racial ethnic identity. So, the kind of racial socialization practices or messages that is passed on from South Asian American parents to children can also impact their healthy ethnic identity formation. Furthermore, as I mentioned, the intergenerational acculturative gaps can make it that much harder for children to develop a healthy ethnic and cultural pride, and that can have ramifications on their healthy ethnic identity development. Another issue that I wish to highlight is, again, coming back to the racial socialization as well as gender role socialization. Again, the parental messages that might bestow both ethnic pride, but can also be linked to race-related stress and adjustment difficulties among South Asian American youth. Also, it is very important to recognize the traditional patriarchy that is rampant in South Asian American cultures or South Asian cultures, which might impose control and restrict South Asian American girls in their upward mobility. So, in conclusion, what I have presented is just a bird's eye view of the several factors or issues that can impact the lived experiences of South Asian American children and adolescents in American schools. I wish to state that the continued invisibility of South Asian American youth in research and representation, it masks the diverse needs, struggles, and racialized experiences these youth have in schools. There is need for greater research and understanding of the educational, social, and lived experiences of South Asian American individuals. And this understanding is critical to their psychological well-being. Thank you.